Like most traditional MMOs, Final Fantasy XIV holds on to the holy trinity of combat design. There are tanks, healers, and damage dealers. In many MMOs, the tank role has historically been the highest in demand, while simultaneously being the most demanding, which is to say that everyone needs a tank, but nobody wants to play one. And why would they? The role is arguably the most pivotal component of your group's composition. If a tank is played badly, then you can't expect to get far. So if you're thinking about playing Final Fantasy XIV, or you recently started, or you've been playing for thousands of hours and you're still afraid of tanking, let me explain how and why you absolutely should play tank in FF14. Let me begin with this, which you may disagree with. Tanking is the easiest role in the game. I started playing Final Fantasy XIV about 4 years ago when this banger of a trailer for Shadowbringers dropped, and all I wanted to do was be this guy. The issue was that I cut my teeth on World of Warcraft, so when I learned that the job being depicted in the trailer, the Dark Knight, is a tank, it was discouraging because tanking in World of Warcraft was miserable. The truth is, on this side of things, it's quite the contrary, and it's all because of one simple gameplay mechanism: the tank stance. This is your first lesson. Number 1. Keep your tank stance on. Your tank stance is an ability respective to your job which drastically increases the enmity or threat or aggro that your abilities generate. As a tank, your responsibility is to keep your enemy's eyes on you. As long as your tank stance is on, it is virtually impossible to lose threat. For paladins, there's Iron Will. For warriors, there's Defiance. For Dark Knight, there's Grit. Lastly, for Gunbreakers, there's Royal Guard. Each of them has a neat little animation, which I like. Unless you're in a raid with another tank who would prefer to be the primary recipient of the enemy's attention, there is no reason to have your tank stance turned off. If you remember to hit this button at the beginning of a dungeon, then you're already halfway to being a competent tank. For your next tip, let's talk about your role-specific abilities. Number 2, know your role. In the Actions and Traits tab, hit P for the hotkey. You'll find a section labeled Role. On this page, you'll find abilities which are universal to the game's tank jobs. Rampart will reduce the damage you take by 20% for 20 seconds. Low Blow will stun your target for 3 seconds, although some targets are immune to stun, so be careful. Provoke is your traditional taunt. It allows you to force an enemy to target you even if it's already being attacked by somebody else. Interject will interrupt an enemy's action. The word action is ill-defined here. If your enemy's spellcast bar is glowing and pulsating, then Interject will work. Otherwise, it won't, but a hard stun like Low Blow might. Reprisal reduces the damage that nearby enemies deal by 10% for 10 seconds. While it seems weaker than Rampart at first glance, Reprisal is useful for mitigating unavoidable damage that your party members take, since it weakens your target rather than just bolstering yourself. Arm's Length is a 6-second barrier which nullifies knockback or draw-in effects, meaning that you cannot be moved by an enemy's ability. In addition, if you are struck by an enemy while Arm's Length is active, that enemy will have its movement speed reduced by 20% for 15 seconds. These tools will provide you with everything you need to tank competently in group dungeons and raids. Employ them often, but judiciously. This may seem like terrible advice, but use your common sense. If you're being attacked by a massive group of enemies, use Rampart to reduce the damage you take and lighten the load on your healer. If an enemy is casting a dangerous spell that you can't get out of, then try to shut it down with Low Blow. If a stray enemy is attacking your group members, then demand its attention with Provoke. If an enemy is casting an interruptible action, then prevent it with Interject. If there's a massive wave of unavoidable damage coming, then save your healer a cast or two by casting Reprisal. If you might get knocked off of a stage to your death, then Arm's Length might prevent a wipe. In addition, if you're sprinting through a dungeon, picking up enemies along the way, using Arm's Length to slow down the hordes will prevent them from attacking you while you're out of range of your healer. The next piece of advice is simple but infinitely effective. Number 3, understand your user interface. In your HUD layout, there is a box called Enemy List. This list displays the number of enemies currently engaged in combat with you. The more enemies you fight, the longer the list becomes. Beside the nameplate of those enemies, there is a colored symbol. As a tank, you need each of the nameplates on the enemy list to have this red-orange symbol beside them. This represents your enmity or your aggro with that target. If you are being attacked by an enemy on the enemy list, then you'll see this red-orange circle. If you're at risk of losing enmity, then the symbol will become this yellow triangle. If you're not being attacked by the enemy at all, then the symbol will turn green. When you're pushing through a dungeon and you're attacking every enemy in sight, the visual spectacle of the game can become a bit difficult to parse. On occasion, you might miss an enemy and therefore lose your enmity with that target, leading to your party members taking unnecessary damage. The enemy list is a simple but highly effective tool to ensure that you always have your enemies enemy's attention. Speaking of attacking every enemy in sight, I want to explain something about tanking etiquette in Final Fantasy XIV. Saving the best for last, number 4, the rule of wall-to-wall pulling. I want to make one thing clear before I explore the point that I'm about to present. New players in Final Fantasy XIV are treated unusually well by veteran players. There's an entire video to be made on why this happens in FF14 and not, say, Lost Ark or World of Warcraft, so I won't get into it here. Trust me when I say that if you express that you are a new player to the group, then your group will adjust to your comfort 99.9% of the time. At higher levels, however, the expectations can change. There's something called wall-to-wall pulling in Final Fantasy XIV's dungeons. Basically, every dungeon in the game is separated into segments. To move from one segment to the other, all of the enemies in the area must be killed. There are typically 2 groups of enemies per segment. So the structure goes as follows. You pull both groups of enemies until you hit a wall. Kill the enemies, then repeat the process until you reach a boss. Repeat both of those processes until you finish the dungeon and farm player commendations. This is the most important piece of information that any prospective tank player needs to understand. While an overwhelming majority of players will respect a tank who chooses to pull one group at a time, that same majority would really appreciate it if you had the wherewithal to employ the many tools you have to pull from wall to wall. Practice this and soon you'll realize that it's far easier than it sounds. Plus, everyone will love you for it. So to answer the question in the title, yes, you should play a tank. It comes with a lot of perks. You get to enjoy instant queues, you get to set the pace of your dungeon runs, and you get to play one of the most enjoyable combat archetypes ever built in an MMO. I'll let you in on a little secret. Tanking in Final Fantasy XIV doesn't feel like tanking. It feels like melee DPS with mitigation and sustain. But most importantly, it's a lot of fun. I hope that this beginner's guide helped illuminate some of the mystery of this role. Let me know if you decide to give it a shot. I love reading your comments. If you have any requests for Final Fantasy XIV topics or resources that you'd like to see in a video, then feel free to let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.